It was a war that was never officially declared, a conflict that nearly destroyed the world. For almost half a century, two superpowers stood on the edge of catastrophe, locked in a silent battle of ideology, technology, and power. This was the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union, once allies in World War II, became bitter enemies. It was a battle of ideologies, capitalism versus communism, freedom versus control. But how did the world become divided? Why did two former allies turn into bitter enemies? And how did this war without bullets shape the world we live in today? Join us as we uncover the full story of the Cold War, from its dangerous beginnings to its unexpected end. The Cold War was not a typical war with battles. It was a global rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. These two superpowers had completely different beliefs. The US supported democracy and capitalism, where businesses and people had the freedom to own property and make money. The Soviet Union promoted communism, where the government controlled the economy, and wealth was supposed to be shared equally among the people. Neither side wanted to fight directly, because both had nuclear weapons that could destroy the world. Instead, they fought by supporting different countries, spreading their ideologies, and competing in every way possible. The Cold War officially started after World War II ended in 1945. The world had just defeated Nazi Germany, but now a new struggle started. The US and the Soviet Union were allies during the war, but they never truly trusted each other. They had different goals for the future of Europe. One major issue was Germany. After the war, Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones controlled by the US, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. The US and its allies wanted a free and democratic Germany, while the Soviets wanted to keep Germany weak and under their control. In 1946, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill gave a speech warning that an Iron Curtain had fallen across Europe. This meant that communist and democratic countries were now completely separated. Stalin tightened his control over Eastern Europe, turning countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and East Germany into communist states controlled by Moscow. The first major crisis of the Cold War happened in 1948, when Joseph Stalin blocked all roads and railways into West Berlin, hoping to force the city to surrender to communism. Berlin was located deep inside Soviet-controlled East Germany, but the western half was controlled by the US, Britain, and France. To prevent the people of West Berlin from starving, the US and its allies organized the Berlin Airlift, flying in food and supplies for almost a year. Stalin eventually backed down and lifted the blockade, but it was clear the Cold War had begun. To stop communism from spreading, the US announced the Truman Doctrine in 1947. This was a policy promising to help any country that was threatened by communism. The US gave billions of dollars in aid to rebuild Europe, hoping that strong economies would resist communism. This was known as the Marshall Plan. The Soviet Union saw this as an American attempt to buy influence in Europe, so they created their own economic alliance for communist countries. By 1949, the world had officially split into 2 major alliances. The United States and its allies formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a military alliance that promised to protect any member under attack. In response, the Soviet Union created the Warsaw Pact in 1955, bringing together communist nations under their control. Now, the world was divided into 2 powerful military alliances. One of the first Cold War conflicts happened in Korea. In 1950, Communist North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea, which was backed by the US and NATO. The war lasted 3 years, killing millions, but ended in a stalemate. The country remains divided to this day, with North Korea becoming an isolated communist dictatorship and South Korea developing into a thriving democracy. The Cold War wasn't just about military power, it also involved nuclear weapons. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic bomb, shocking the world. Until then, the US was the only country with nuclear weapons. This started a dangerous nuclear arms race. Both countries built thousands of powerful bombs, creating a situation where any war between them could destroy the world. The most dangerous moment of the Cold War came in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the U.S. mainland. President John F. Kennedy warned Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to remove them or face war. For 13 days, the world was on the edge of nuclear destruction. Finally, the Soviets agreed to remove the missiles in exchange for the U.S. promising not to invade Cuba and secretly removing American missiles from Turkey. Another major Cold War conflict was the Vietnam War. The U.S. got involved in Vietnam, trying to stop communism from spreading in Southeast Asia. The North Vietnamese, led by Communist leader Ho Chi Minh, fought against South Vietnam and its American allies. The war was long and brutal, lasting from 1955 to 1975. Millions of people died, and the U.S. faced strong anti-war protests at home. In 1975, the U.S. withdrew, and Vietnam became a communist country. It was a major loss for America, leading to distrust in the government and changing public opinion on future wars. The Cold War also extended to space. Both superpowers wanted to prove their superiority through technology and exploration. This led to the space race. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite. In 1961, they sent Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space. But in 1969, the U.S. made history by landing Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon. The space race pushed humanity to new achievements, but was also a way for both countries to show their technological power. By the late 1970s and 1980s, tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union started to ease. Both sides realized that nuclear war was too dangerous. The U.S. and Soviet leaders held meetings to reduce nuclear weapons, and there was a period of relaxation called détente. But the Soviet Union had internal problems. Their economy was struggling, and people in Eastern Europe wanted freedom. In the late 1980s, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced reforms called glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. He allowed more political freedom and economic changes, but this weakened Soviet control over its empire. In 1989, people in East Germany started protesting for freedom. The Berlin Wall, which had divided East and West Berlin since 1961, was torn down in November 1989. This symbolized the end of communist rule in Eastern Europe. One by one, Soviet-controlled countries broke away. In December 1991, the Soviet Union officially collapsed. The Cold War was over. The U.S. emerged as the world's only superpower, and many former communist countries became democracies. But was it truly the end of Cold War tensions? Even today, echoes of the Cold War remain. Conflicts between nations, nuclear threats, and political rivalries continue. Have we really learned from the past, or are we still standing on the edge of another Cold War? Let us know what you think in the comments. What was the most important moment of the Cold War? Should the world have handled things differently? Let's discuss below. History is more than just the past. It's a warning for the future. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe for more historical deep dives, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.